Hi, I'm currently going through a hard time as a first-time mum with a 9-month-old. I feel depressed and anxious and am highly neurotic and volatile. Can you suggest anything to help me be a better mum? Well, lots of people have a hard time with their 9 months old. I guess the first question would be, are you getting enough sleep? Do you have enough help? Are you eating enough, especially in the morning? And you're going to feel highly neurotic and volatile to some degree because, well, you've been through quite a physiological trauma and it's very demanding to have a newborn baby. So the best thing I could say, not knowing you, is to make sure that you have people around that you can talk to about your baby and that you can and that you can take a break when you need to and have someone spell you. I mean, that's often the role that a husband plays in the first year of a baby's life, is that he's supposed to watch the mother to make sure that she doesn't get overwhelmed by the demands of the baby. And so I would hope that you're able to ask for support when you need it and not to be afraid of asking for support, especially to get a rest and to get something to eat, because that's really important, especially in the morning. Other than that, I can't tell you anything really specific, unfortunately, given that I don't know anything about the specifics of your situation. If it gets out of hand, you should go. The other thing I should say is, if it gets out of hand, you should go speak with your doctor, with a professional, because you might have postpartum depression. I mean, there's some dispute about whether that exists and as an independent diagnostic entity, but you can certainly be physiologically stressed, and if you have a predisposition to depression, then that kind of physiological stress and sleep disruption can bring it on. So I would say, if it really gets out of hand, don't hesitate to go talk to someone professional. It may be necessary to do that because you don't want to fall too far down a hole, that's for sure. It's time to rid yourself of your current presuppositions. There's another thing that, see, in the Soviet Union, when Solzhenitsyn wrote about the Soviet Union and its pathologies, it sort of peaked in terms of its pathological authoritarianism when it became illegal to complain that your life wasn't going well. And you just think about how horrible that is, because lots of times your life isn't going well. I mean, and I don't mean this in some casual way. I mean, maybe you have diabetes and maybe you're going to lose your feet or something. Like, it's nothing trivial that's going on here. Something is not good. Or maybe it's economic, or maybe you're unemployed, but you see, the idea in the Soviet Union was, well, we already have all the answers. Everything's perfect already. That's what totalitarians think. Well, if everything's perfect and you're suffering, then, well, maybe there's something wrong with you. Because everything is perfect after all, and if you're suffering, then, and what are you going to come out and say? Well, I'm suffering? It's like, well, then you're evidence that things aren't perfect, right? You're like a widow or an orphan in an Old Testament story, when the kings got too high and mighty, then they wouldn't pay enough attention to the widows and the orphans, and then the prophet would come along and say, those widows and orphans, a lot more important than you think they are, and if you don't pay attention to them properly, then things are going to fall apart around you in a way that you just can't even imagine. And so, well, then you're sort of like your own widow and your own orphan, but you don't get to say, hey, look, things aren't perfect yet because I'm actually having still quite a rough time here. You don't get to admit to your own suffering. If you can't admit to your own suffering, then you certainly see the suffering, especially the additional suffering, the excess suffering, should be treated as evidence that you're not doing something quite right yet. It should be treated as evidence that you're wrong. There's something important that you're doing that's wrong. I understand how harsh that is, and I'm not saying that everyone who's suffering is suffering because they're doing something in some simple way that's wrong. I was in an elevator once in a hospital. It was a very terrifying thing. And this person got on who was just in an absolute state of shock. It was really not good. And I don't remember how this happened, but I engaged the person in conversation, and they just said that they had just been diagnosed with what looked to be terminal cancer. And what was horrifying about it was that what they were doing was going over their life in the elevator, trying to figure out what they had done in order to deserve such a fate. They'd immediately taken it on themselves as a moral failing. And that's not what I'm saying. You can't come up to someone who has cancer and say, well, if you weren't such a bloody idiot throughout your whole life, you wouldn't have cancer. And believe me, that happens a lot more than you think. And people who have diseases like that get blamed for it. That's not what I'm saying. It's not like that. It's a more generalized attitude. That is that if life isn't yet what it should be, then you have a primary responsibility to do something about it. And the place to start looking is to your own errors and to fix them. And that's a safe bet, man, because you're probably doing some things that you wouldn't have to be doing, that if you fixed would make things better. So it's time to let go and to sacrifice who you are for who you could be.
How could I overcome my fear of driving on freeways? Well, one of the things you could do, this is Ellis, is do a fair bit of imagining driving on freeways and try to make the imagining as realistic as possible. But then the other thing you can do is, again, it's graduated exposure. If you're afraid of driving, go drive with someone you trust in a parking lot on Sunday morning when there's no one there. And then drive around the block in a street that isn't busy, and then go to a slightly busier street, and then go to a slightly busier street, and then find a highway that's like just a two-laner, so that you can practice merging and that sort of thing. And you got to build a plan, say with 20 degrees of difficulty, with the highest degree of difficulty maybe being merging onto a busy 4-lane highway. I mean, you could go at night and practice merging onto the busy highway because it won't be busy at night. So I would say what you do is you break it down into small steps and then practice each step until you're bored with the step. And when you're bored with it, that means you're no longer anxious about it. And don't quit. Like stick at it, because it's really useful to overcome a fear. And once you've identified a fear, then you've identified something to overcome that can definitely make you stronger. So like good luck with it, and get professional, like take a driving course if you need to as well. And find someone to work with that isn't going to make you nervous and isn't going to harass you, but don't quit. It's really important to overcome a fear like that.